There on WNYC. With us now is Manhattan Borough President Brad Hoylman-Sigal, who took office in January after more than a decade representing the West Side in the state Senate. 6 months into the job, his borough is at the center of some of the biggest stories in the city right now. The Legionnaires' outbreak on the Upper East Side that has now killed 4 people. A federal overhaul of Penn Station, which he convened a town hall on last week. We'll talk about that. A city council fight over the future of the horse carriages in Central Park. We'll get his take on that. Plus his plan to organize a borough-wide tenants union. He's also got $50 million in city capital money because the borough presidents get some discretionary money to spend as they choose, and he's putting $50 million toward arts and culture. Also, he's got a new neighborhood report card for the borough of Manhattan, neighborhood by neighborhood, on dog waste. Borough President Hoylman-Sigal. Oh, do we have him yet? Welcome back to WNYC. Hi there. I wasn't sure if we were hooked up. I knew we were having a little telephone problem there. Hi,
no,
welcome back
I'm here,
to WNYC.
Brian. Good to be back. How are you?
Good. And belated congratulations on your election as borough president. Let's start with the Legionnaires' outbreak. Public health isn't necessarily a borough president office lane, but this is happening in your borough. What are you hearing from residents in Carnegie Hill and Yorkville? Is this over as far as new cases?
Well, I think the health department's done a really good job, Brian, in communicating with local elected officials and the community board in particular. And, we haven't seen any new cases for almost a week now. So that's very good news. Obviously, the 4 deaths are very distressing. But we've been in constant contact with the health department. They've had multiple outreaches to the local community. And I hope we're on a pathway toward resolution and good health for that neighborhood and the entirety of the borough.
City Council Speaker Julie Menon, who lives in the affected area, has been critical of the city's handling of this. You just said the health department's been doing a good job, but she called on them to proactively disinfect every cooling tower in the area. Do you agree with her?
I do, and obviously this is a procedure that this administration inherited, including the fact that there's a deficit of water ecologists, in the order of like 20. So we need to get on the case and hire more of those professionals to ensure that these cooling towers are, in fact, clean and safe.
And listeners, we can take your calls for Manhattan Borough President Brad Hoylman-Sigal, your calls and texts, especially if you live in the borough, but you don't have to. 212-433 WNYC, 212-433-9692. Call or text on any of the topics that I laid out in the intro or anything else that you think is relevant. I want to go right on to this idea of yours for a borough-wide tenants union. I see you've hired a longtime tenant organizer, Alejandro Corriat, to build a Manhattan-wide tenants union. That was a campaign promise of yours. What does a borough-wide tenants union actually do?
Well, what it does, Brian, it connects tenants who may not know that they share the same landlord. And we've seen this before when I represented the Lower East Side of Manhattan. There were tenant organizations that found out that they shared the same landlord, in many cases a bad landlord, and we were able to work with them. And it just goes to the whole point of strength in numbers. When you share information, when you have a coalition that's built borough-wide, look, there's a problem with a lot of tenants even knowing who their landlord is in the first place, an issue I tried to address when I was a state senator in Albany. So many tenants send their rent checks on a monthly basis to an anonymous LLC. We tried to unmask some of those landlords, but it's a process. And I think a tenants union is going to build on that effort to connect tenants. And of course, we know that this is a citywide effort. on the part of the Mondani administration. So we think this coalition could reverberate throughout the entire city, not just Manhattan.
Right. Last week, Mayor Mamdani announced the city will legally recognize tenant unions, but I'm not sure what that means because, as I understand it, a landlord could still refuse to negotiate with one. So what does recognition actually change?
I think tenant unions could have potential standing in court to represent tenants and to file claims. And I think that's going to be an important component of a tenant union, but it's also information sharing. It's also coalition building. It's also leverage for a class of renters, frankly, that haven't had a seat at the table. And a lot of renters don't know also, Brian, that they're protected by the relatively new good cause eviction laws that were passed by Albany, where market rate tenants actually have new rights, including to be protected from unconscionable rent increases. So a tenants union in Manhattan and elsewhere is going to share that information and empower tenants and make sure that they know what rights they have when they're negotiating with their landlord.
What do you say to those who ask why a government office is funding tenant organizing? The head of a small landlords group says it's not appropriate for city funds to create an office that undermines her ability to run her property.
Well, you know, I support if landlords want to act collectively too, and they do, they have the same right under the law. So, look, these are rights that we've afforded tenants through city and state legislation. We need to make sure that those laws are enacted and that tenants know what their rights are, and that's why I think a tenants union Manhattan-wide is so important.
Do you have a take on the Rent Guidelines Board freezing the rent stabilized rents for 2 years last month? Small landlords say their costs went up more than 5% in the past year, and now their income is flat. They suffer inflation too, and also that this might result in fewer rent-stabilized apartments even being put on the market, because if they're vacant, the landlords won't feel that they have the money to do the renovations that are needed and then make enough revenue from them. So what do you think about those arguments on either side?
Well, I supported the rent freeze. I think the data supported the rent freeze. I'm happy with it. It's always a balancing act, and we'll continue to follow the information provided by tenants, by landlords, and ensure that the RGB makes the right decision. When they hear from both sides.
And one more on this. There's a bill in Albany that would force landlords to the bargaining table with tenants. You spent 13 years in the state Senate. I'm guessing you would support such a bill. Do you think it could get through?
Yeah, it seems like I would. I haven't read it, but I'm really strongly in favor of getting tenants to the table. I think we've seen time and time again that tenants are not heard by their landlords, and that's part of the impetus for a Manhattan-wide tenants union. This is a group of New Yorkers, a million strong under rent regulation, whose concerns have been largely disregarded by previous administrations. I'm really proud of the Mondani team for stepping up and recognizing their value. Look, affordability, the number one issue on New Yorkers' minds, is directly connected to rent. And so these are all steps in the right direction for my constituents in Manhattan, particularly renters.
On the Legionnaire's disease outbreak, listener texts, why can't the Department of Health and Mental Health at least say where on the Upper East Side Legionnaire's patients are concentrated? I had this question too the other day, and I didn't get to ask the guest we had on that, who was the health commissioner. If we know that they're concentrated around 79th Street as opposed to they're concentrated around 91st Street or whatever it is, then that helps identify which cooling tower is the contaminated one.
Well, we certainly know the zip codes: 10028, 10075, 10128. Those are imprinted on the inside of my brain.
They must know more specifically where the hospitalized patients at very least are coming from.
Of privacy concerns, and we've been pushing them for specific building acknowledgement. So I think that is a fair question. I hope we get more information so people can take the steps they need to safeguard their health. But of course, as it stands now, the number of cases have evaporated, thank goodness. And, more information is always better. I support the speaker's call for that. And obviously, we need to get more of those water ecologists out inspecting the water cooling towers themselves.
My guest is Manhattan Borough President Brad Hoylman-Sigal. If you're just joining us, 212-433-WNYC. If you have a question or a comment, 212-433-9692. We'll get to Penn Station. We'll get to horse carriages. Listener writes, how is he addressing the homeless encampment in the vicinity of the Intrepid? Are you familiar with that encampment? This has been making big news in the New York Post day after day. The Post, which is hammering Mayor Mamdani for not breaking up the encampment.
Well, if you read the New York Post as your only source of information about Manhattan, I'm afraid you're misguided. That said, we did meet with the commissioner last week about this issue and took a walking tour of the area and talked about strategies to both clear these encampments and provide support to those individuals who are on the street. So it's a two-pronged strategy, and we've been pressing the administration to act more swiftly, not just on the west side, on the east side too, around Waterside Plaza, where we sent a letter along with our elected colleagues urging action. No New Yorker wants to see a distressed individual on the street in their neighborhood or in any place. We have to move these folks to housing, and that's the goal of the DHS commissioner. And there are legal constraints around that, but we're working through it with them. And in fact, I have a meeting with the commissioner today about this very topic.
If you're urging action and faster action, it sounds like to some degree you agree with the New York Post that the Mamdani administration isn't acting swiftly enough or taking this seriously enough. What's your understanding of why they're not?
Well, what I don't disagree is taking photographs of homeless people and plastering them across the pages of a publication. I think that's abhorrent. And at the same time, there's human suffering. And there are a lot of reasons, legal and otherwise, why it is difficult to clear encampments and move people quickly, including the mistrust on the part of the unhoused individual who fears that their belongings may be lost and everything they own and possess is on the street with them. So this is a human problem. Not one of publicity, and it's sad that it comes to this, but we know
right.
how that.
But is this, in your
works.
opinion, ideology on the part of the Mamdani administration against sweeps, preventing what you think would be the right action to take, or what do you say is going on?
I don't think so,
with them?
Brian. No, I don't. Obviously, they have a lot of compassion and care. That's their job. But no, there are legal constraints that were set forth in a stipulation agreement between a homeless advocacy group and a previous city administration that puts constraints on how quickly they can clear encampments. So I think they're doing the best they can under the circumstances. It's our job as advocates, though, for our constituents to identify neighborhoods where these encampments have been identified by Manhattanites, and we'll continue to do that and work with the administration and hopefully get these people the housing they deserve.
Here's a text, skeptical of the rent freeze. It says, hi, my apartment is not rent regulated, but my landlord does have regulated apartments in his portfolio. Is it fair to me to pay for the increases he can't charge them? So the premise is this landlord that has some of each is going to raise the rent on the non-regulated tenants more to cover what he might be losing on the rent-stabilized ones.
Well, this goes to the issue that I think I'm trying to address as Manhattan Borough President. I've approved 1,400 new units of housing across the borough. About half of those are affordable. We have a supply problem, and we need to build more. And part of my job as Manhattan Borough President is to ease the building of new affordable units throughout the borough, to ease the movement from office to residential in a safe and productive way, and that's really one of my main charges, Brian, as a borough president.
Another listener writes on a different issue, on Saturday during the intense rain, every building on my side of this East Village block had sewer line backup flooding their basements. How about using some of the Biden-era infrastructure money that came to the city to increase the capacity of the sewer mains under the streets? What do you say to that listener about that particular incident, that particular proposal, or if you think heavy rains and flooding are becoming a bigger problem in the global warming era?
They definitely are. I really concur with your caller there. You know, New York City was designated a subtropical climate back in 2020, kind of hard to believe. And that means, you know, where we formerly had about 1.7 inches of rainfall per hour, that's shot up to 2.5 to 3.5 inches. And probably in an hour or so, we're going to see a manifestation of that. We need strategy to both, you know, create more infrastructure, hard infrastructure to accommodate that additional rainfall. But also an idea that we're exploring is the creation of what we're calling the Manhattan sponge, where we are going to add green spaces, more permeable pavers throughout Manhattan, and, you know, create a system that points to greater water retention. The bottom line is, in Manhattan, Brian, 80% of our surface area is impervious, and that's not designed for the rainfall we get. So we have to pivot to a new strategy as it pertains to this additional rainfall that we're likely to get, again, in just an hour or so, as the forecasters predict.
Yeah. So who is that on, that responsibility?
Well, I'd like to think it's partially on policymakers like me, but certainly the city administration and the state of New York. I mean, every level of government, including the federal government, has to come to grips with climate change. And we know that, unfortunately, it's an issue that's falling down the list of concerns on the part of voters. But I think it's going to rise again, just as sea level rises. Yes,
and there is a flood warning in effect as we speak at 5 minutes before 11 o'clock, just so everybody knows if you didn't hear it before. Back to the issue of more specifically identifying where, where on the Upper East Side the Legionnaires' cases are. Listener writes, the privacy concerns that you cited are a false argument. HIPAA laws do not pertain to anonymous information. Residents have a right to know what buildings are involved. No individual identifiers are required. What do you say to that, listener?
Well, that's what the health department's informing us, but at the same time, more information is better. So we've called on it. I support the speaker in her call for more information. We need to allow New Yorkers to protect themselves during these types of outbreaks. I think it makes good sense.
Housing question, public housing question from Tito in Chelsea. Tito, you're on WNYC with the Manhattan Borough President. Hi.
Hi, Brad. Hi,
Tito. Yes, we have.
And you've always been a champion of working class people. So I don't understand why you would agree to side with the developers to dismantle the Chelsea public housing, Elliott Housing, and Fulton Housing. Just one more thing I want to say. I grew up in public housing. It's the only affordable housing left in this city. And if they do it here, the rest of the city will go. So you cannot stop homelessness by destroying truly affordable housing. We need your support. I've spoken to you before about this. We cannot. This policy is a stinker. It hurts thousands of people, and the buildings are structurally sound.
Tito, thank you. This is about the conversion, tell me if I'm characterizing it right, of those projects in Chelsea to more of private managed buildings?
Right. The Fulton Elliott Chelsea conversion, the RAD Pact, it's called, a federal program that was instituted by President Obama. Look, it's the least best option because public housing residents have been failed by every level of government. Brian, we still don't have a dedicated revenue stream at the city, state, or federal level for our NYCHA developments. So I support this effort because nobody's come up with a better plan. And the conditions in which our constituents live are absolutely unacceptable. Mold, heating systems that continue to break, insecure entryways, the lack of cameras, and asbestos. It's not acceptable to have our constituents who are rent-paying tenants, by the way, who pay their rent to live in these conditions. So we've engaged with the private developers through this federal program to rebuild Fulton Elliott Chelsea with the support of every elected official on the west side of Manhattan.
Does the formula change from what public housing tenants now pay for how much rent will be required?
No, not at all. In fact, their rights remain the same, and that was a really important point that we as representatives, including Congressman Adler, were negotiating through the entirety of this process, which has stopped and started numerous times due to legal challenges. But again, it's the least best option, and something has to be done. And so this is the route that I'm glad we're finally taking.
The least worst option. You know, I'm going to go back to Tito on this and say, Tito, if the borough president is right, that the rent formula would be the same as for people who are currently in those buildings.
Hello?
And
Hello?
the buildings can be built anew to remediate the mold problems, and et cetera. Why isn't this in their interest?
The reality is that the buildings are structurally sound. The city council just passed billions of dollars in their budget. That money could have gone to fixing up these buildings rather than going to the private sector, because Section 8 based housing is the private sector. Why are we using our tax money to fill the pockets of these terrible people? I mean, look, the reason we're in this situation is that the landlords, the developers are getting away with murder, and the government is going right along with it. They tax money rather than fixing the problem that we have in Chelsea. They're giving it over to the private sector.
Tito, thank you. I'm going to leave it there. Borough President, so one more response on this is, would the landlords would the new owners in this plan be allowed to refuse Section 8 vouchers as payment of rent, as private sector landlords are now elsewhere?
No, absolutely not, Brian. And you know, Tito's point about the city budget and the state budget stepping in, I wish that were possible. But the capital needs deficit for NYCHA citywide is $80 billion, with a B, billion. And that's more than 2/3 of the city budget. So we have to come up with alternative ways to fix these apartments. Rat Pact is the proposal on the table, and that's how we're proceeding.
And Lisa in Washington Heights, you're on WNYC with the Borough President. Hi.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call. I'm calling about the horse carriages, and I have wondered for a very long time why we don't get cooperation with the city, with the carriage drivers, with whatever unions, with the Department of Education, with the Central Park Conservancy, why the horses cannot be turned out in a grassy area in Central Park when they are at leisure, because that would be an economic driver for the city, why the horse carriages can't continue to operate in the park, why they cannot be stabled in the park, why students could not be able to have humane education around horses and other animals, and why students that are interested could not learn and participate in currying, caring for, etc., the horses.
So your argument, Lisa, is don't abolish the horse carriage industry, create conditions under which the horses are treated more humanely than they are currently. Is that would you agree with that characterization?
Yes, as well as humane education through the Education Department of Education, public education, as well as having them as a tourist attraction when they are turned out in the park. All of those things. Because
hang on, all of those things. I'm going to get a response. And actually don't know where you are on this issue yet, Borough President. Are you for abolition of the horse carriage industry? And what would you say to Lisa?
Well, I would say to Lisa that I share her concern about how these horses are treated. They need to be treated humanely. I think an estimation of a society, of course, is how we treat animals like horses. And, my team, Brian, did a study, which is on my website, that showed that there have been 40 deaths, horse carriage deaths, since 1982. And we used an algorithm to predict what those future deaths might look like, working with the Columbia University law professor. And by 2030, we could expect another 11 more horse deaths under the status quo. And of course, this doesn't even go to the tragic death of that young man who was visiting New York City a couple of weeks ago.
Come from the fact that they are being used in Central Park? Because the supporters of the industry, besides, of course, they want their jobs, would say that doesn't seem like a particularly difficult life.
Well, we've seen time and time again the problems with horses on our city streets. They are not animals who should suffer those conditions, whether it's automobile traffic or noise, or the heat that they endure. And that's why so many of them have perished since 1982, 40 of them. And we could expect 11 more by 2030 under the same conditions. So it really is time to pull the plug, to get these workers the respect and dignity and retraining they deserve, but also finally address this long festering issue that future administrations promised to solve, and I'm hopeful that this one, in fact, will.
Penn Station. You had a town hall last week. More than 300 people came out, I see, to debate through running the idea that commuter trains could keep moving through Penn Station and continue on into New Jersey if they've, come from Long Island. Instead of ending their runs there, the idea is to create capacity in Penn Station for more trains per hour to come in. but I see not everybody agrees that would be the outcome. Where are you on that?
It was a great forum. We had Train Daddy there through video link, Andy Byford, who seems to be open to the idea of through running, and that was my takeaway. Since the federal government has taken charge of the redesign of Penn Station, and that would also mean the federal government paying for the redesign of Penn Station. I'm very excited at the prospect of through running. We have to increase capacity, especially with the addition of dozens of new trains coming from New Jersey through the Gateway project. So through running is the way to get that done without demolishing an entire block of Manhattan, where there are small businesses, historic resources, and tenants. So it was a very fulsome discussion, but I think most people think that it's a possibility. The federal government just released a study last week on the topic, and there's another one coming up shortly, and we'll see where they come out. But I hope that the discussion was an impetus to think big and to embrace through running as a potential. Other world cities, London and Paris, have through running. We have it with Amtrak going to Albany. We should really consider it here at Penn Station. This is a once in a generation
What's the
opportunity.
actual problem that could solve?
It would solve the capacity issue. If you have to stop a train and offload all the passengers, and then it goes to the rail yard, you're losing valuable time, and you're losing the opportunity to get more people to their destination. That's really what it's about.
So more people more quickly to their destinations, basically.
That's right. So you shouldn't have to get off of New Jersey Transit to get onto Long Island Railroad or to head to Westchester. You should be able to pay one fare and stay on the train and go to your endpoint.
Well, not Westchester, right? It's not going to make a right at Penn Station and go up the Hudson line. That's not part of the plan, right?
It could do. That is a potential option here.
Julie in Manhattan on what I think is a Hamilton Heights issue. Julie, you're on WNYC with Borough President. Hello.
Hi, thanks. It's actually not Hamilton Heights, it's Washington Heights.
Oh, sorry.
Mr. Hoylman-Sigal rattled off 3 zip codes earlier, 10028, 10128, 10075, but I wanted to talk about a different zip code, very different, and an issue happening in 10032, the Riverside Drive Viaduct construction project. Started before the pandemic, much needed repairs to the elevated portion of what's actually Riverside Drive West, like in the 150s and low 160s. There was some delays, and then the pandemic happened. But what's been really reprehensible is 4 years ago, after some dispute, the contractor walked off the job. So nothing has happened for 4 years. Yet the roadway is still littered with construction equipment. There's big metal plates. You can't access a lot of things. Tremendous issues. There's a bus that stops right in front of my building that's hard to get to. There's a lot of seniors here with mobility issues. My building, River Terrace in Mitchell-Lama, is a naturally occurring retirement community in Newark with lots of seniors who can't get to the bus easily anymore. There's problems with deliveries. There's rats. There's eyesores. You can't get across the street to look at the beautiful river views. And most worrisome is a lack of access for emergency vehicles and personnel, particularly in the building north to me, River Arts. You literally can't get an ambulance into that building or to stop in front of that building. I heard last night about a gentleman who had a heart attack in January, and his relatives had to help him walk out and walk a block to meet the ambulance.
Julie, I'm going to leave it there because we're going to run out of time in the segment soon. I'm sure this is not the first you've heard about that Riverside Viaduct problem up there, Borough President. What's your take on it? Who's in charge even? It sounds like that's not clear. And what can you do about it?
Well, we've spoken to DOT about it at the city level, and this is why this program of yours, Brian, is so helpful to help elected officials, focus on issues like this. And I'd love to be in touch with your caller about what she thinks the right next step is. It is a mess and deserves the attention of multiple city agencies.
Julie, do you want her to, should we give her some kind of contact information off the air, or should she just?
She should email me at bradhoylman@gmail.com.
There you go, Julie. All right, last thing. You put your office's entire capital budget, each borough president gets some money for that, capital budget, $50 million, into arts and culture. Past borough presidents spread that money out across housing, parks, social services. In an affordability crisis, why all of it into the arts?
Well, I can't think of a sector that's more important to Manhattan and more beleaguered due to cuts at the federal level, in addition to the suppression of free speech and artistic expression. So we wanted to make a statement on that alone, but also support some incredibly worthy institutions like the Schomburg Center in Harlem, or Musea del Barrio, or, you know, our standard bearers like the American Museum of Natural History. And we did it in a way, Brian, where we funded these organizations with a matching challenge grant, where we asked these institutions to go out to see if they can match the money that we were providing through your tax dollars in the borough president's office. So yes, $50 million committed to arts and cultural institutions, but through this challenge grant, which we're calling the Manhattan Multiplier, we've raised another $35 million in private foundation, philanthropic, and corporate monies. So it's a total of $85 million now for the arts and cultural sector in Manhattan. And finally, I would say that this is a way to reach the most people, in my opinion, by supporting arts institutions, large and small. And by the way, a lot of public schools were on that list and got new performance spaces and black box theaters and music rooms. We think we're going to make a difference to the most Manhattanites that we can during this budget cycle.
Wait, I have to ask you about your office's report card grading every Manhattan neighborhood on dog waste complaints. We are, 40 years into the Pooper Scooper law era, and yet Manhattanites complain all the time. Oh, more dog waste right on the sidewalk. What's the matter with people, they say. What did you find and what's the fix?
Well, we were able to compare different neighborhoods and gave them letter grades based on 311 complaints. But we also found an interesting correlation, Brian, but not a surprising one. There were fewer dog waste reports in neighborhoods that had a higher concentration of litter baskets. That seems pretty simple. And there were also fewer dog waste complaints in neighborhoods that had more dog waste bag dispensers. And I'm glad that the city council has actually introduced a bill to make dog waste dispensers more widespread across all the 5 boroughs. There's also a disturbing correlation between dog waste and rat complaints, because dog waste is a source of food for rats. So these are public health issues. It's not just a matter of quality of life. It's a matter of decency and cleanliness and social behavior that we hope this report highlights.
So more corner trash baskets, more dispensers where people can take those bags to pick up the waste with.
And more conscientious dog and pet partners who pick up after their Fido.
Manhattan Borough President Brad Hoylman-Sigal, thanks so much for coming on and answering questions from all over the borough. We really appreciate it. Let's do it again.
I would love that. Thanks so much, Brian.
WNYC's journalism and storytelling is heard by millions of passionate listeners. Sponsors of our programming gain our listeners' attention and their respect. Learn about how your organization can support WNYC and WNYC Studios at sponsorship.wnyc.org.